So my name is Tim Brown, and I build secure healthcare solutions that are productive. And my goal today is to hope to give you the confidence in building HIPAA-compliant applications today. How many of you, just so I get a kind of feel, how many of you have built medical solutions before in FileMaker? That's what I kind of expected. The majority, people that come are already people that have been doing it for a while. How many are, feel comfortable that they're kind of HIPAA compliant, or you need to know more information about it? Kind of wishy-washy? Yeah. Hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on that with my experience over the last, I don't know, gosh, it's maybe too long. I don't feel that old, but I guess I am getting older. Since we're talking about healthcare security, we have to start with HIPAA. And so that's what we'll do. Then we'll talk about how FileMaker platform can be utilized to hit those security points. We'll go through that. And then we'll discuss mobility. How can we secure our mobile devices and use FileMaker Go on them, whether inside the institution or outside the institution? And a very overlooked part is dealing with IT security teams. I've had many dealings with them at this point in my career, and I'll give you my insight on the complexity of that and what they're expecting from us. Just want to take you a moment to look at this little tug of war that we have going on here. So there's a lot of external forces in healthcare security. We have HIPAA, we have laws, we have regulations, we have state regulations, we have organization policies. And then on the other side, we're trying for the department that we may be working for, is to give them information that's quick and easy to get, accessible, and also flexible, that we can make changes as we're going along. And can be a real struggle. So who are we protecting? I think we're really protecting the organization first. And people will say, oh, you're protecting patient information. But if we're protecting the organization, then we are by de facto protecting the employees and we're protecting the patients who entrust us with their data. And how many of you realize that the security officer, especially within hospitals, are criminally responsible for these penalties? Yeah, so this is a big deal, especially in larger organizations. They have a huge responsibility. So I just want to get through a couple of HIPAA terms. I think we can just quickly throw them up. I think you already know what they are. But the one thing I will point out is required versus addressable in the HIPAA regulations. So required means what it means. You have to do it. And then there are some things that are addressable. And addressable for one organization may be a requirement for another organization. And it's hard to know what that might be. It could be financial, right? So if I'm dealing with a small physician group and to implement something would cost them $100,000 to implement and it's addressable, they may not do it. But maybe for a large medical center, $100,000 is nothing for them to put it in, right? So that's kind of, usually a lot of time it revolves around money. There used to be 3, now there's 4. So there's 4 major rules. And we have the privacy rule, the breach notification rule, the enforcement rule, and the main thing that we're concerned about is the security rule. You kind of need to know them a little bit, but we're just going to focus in on that. There's only 2 on here that are really, we might get a little bit involved with on the administrative safeguards. A lot of these are at the department level or IT level, and that's disaster recovery. We might be involved to provide IT with more information for documentation of how we're going to handle disaster recovery when it happens. And the last thing we all need to sign, especially for external consultants, is a BAA agreement. How many of you are in-house? Okay, so it's about half. Okay. At least you don't have to sign your life away. So physical safeguards. They don't directly impact us either here. I mean, we're software developers. We want to be actually working with the data. But it's a good thing to know. A lot of times it's about access control, the facility. So if you're going to go into the server room, generally you have to swipe your card. They're keeping track of who's entering and exiting that room. So that would be physical access control. Device and media controls, more and more places. Many years ago, when I was at Columbia, you put a USB thumb drive in, and not that you couldn't do it, but it would automatically require you to have encryption software put onto that thumb drive. Very smart, right? Or a lot of them are just disabled. You can't put a thumb drive into a USB port. And then workstation security. I mean, these are up to the institution, the facility, what their policies are, but it could be just locking down a workstation in a public area. The technical safeguards is where we're going to start, okay? I like to break it down. These are not HIPAA terminology here, but I like to break it down into these groupings. We want to control the access. We want to see who's changing data. We want to know who's viewing data. And we want to know how to recover the data or restore the data, okay? Active Directory is our friend. How many people have integrated Active Directory into their solution? I think it's paramount to use that as a starting point of making sure that our solutions are HIPAA compliant. It does a few things for us. One, it offloads our responsibility for managing staff to IT. Right? We don't have to know who's going. We set up our groups in FileMaker, and then they have access to the system. It requires unique accounts. I mean, I can't even believe that it's on there anymore, but unique accounts are required under HIPAA. But 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. A lot of people shared accounts to get into systems. Also, Active Directory, what it'll do for you too, is use the facility's guidelines for passwords. How often does a password need to change? 30 days, 60 days? And what's the complexity of that password need to be? So if we had to do that in FileMaker, that would be a lot more complicated. And of course, you can use OAuth as well. So don't use local accounts. You might use it for your master full access account, but for people routinely getting into it, that should be disabled. So we have transmission security. I mean, how many people have heard about SSL while they've been here so far? I mean, I think we all have. And Chris, who did the session right before here, really went into depth, even down to the certificate level and how that works and flaws in that whole thing, more than I even know about it. But we want to make sure that the data in transit is encrypted. Because sometimes the biggest vulnerability is inside of our own four walls. A lot of people don't know about emergency access. So if there is an emergency, let's say a crisis, and they need to get into the system to review clinical information, then there should be in maybe their standard operating procedure book or something like that, a count that can let them get into the system when they don't have access to it. But it also doesn't need to be some huge crisis. It could be just that a nurse forgot their password and she needs to get in because otherwise it's going to impact on patient care. That's all that really needs to be. So it doesn't have to be some huge event. So I just want to make that clear. But I think if we're going to implement something like this, we want to make sure that if someone does, quote unquote, break the glass to get in and use an account, that someone knows about it. So we want to obviously log that account to make sure that administrators know. I put my one addressable thing on here, okay, which is auto log off. FileMaker has auto log off, but I don't really think it's, not that it's a bad thing. I mean, the auto log off is perfect in FileMaker, but from a practicality at the user level, if the decision at the institution is to have be kicked off of a system after 5 or 10 minutes of inactivity, I don't like that at all, personally, okay? That's the institution's policy. But I think the better way of implementing, because I watch users, how many times do you see users with your application and also maybe in Epic at the same time, and also might be in the surgical information system too, and all of a sudden, you see Epic getting timed out because they hit that limit. But they're actively working on that workstation. It's supposed to be a workstation rule, not a specific application rule. And it's for if you walk away from the computer, that someone can't gain access to the system. So obviously turning on, and I think every single computer has it in an institution, that it goes into screensaver mode and then requires a username and password. But you can lock it down to for every 5 or 10 minutes, but I think you might get, you know, some complaints. And finally, encrypting at rest. So we want, during the backup, let me take one step back. If we encrypt the database itself using the developer tool, that means that when the data's at rest, so that means the FileMaker server kind of isn't running or it's a backup, that data is encrypted, and we have now data integrity that no one's manipulating that data. But once the server is on and active, it gets decrypted, and it's decrypted for the whole while the service is running. Okay, I think it's important to realize that. And then at that point, it's the data transmission between the user and the server that's getting encrypted in transit. So encrypting at rest is really important, obviously, to turn on, and it will protect your backups, integrity of those backups if you have to do a recovery later on. So my favorite thing is audit trails and integrity in audit trails. I've spent countless, probably a couple hundred hours working on audit trails and building audit trails. How many people have audit trails in their system? Okay. How many people are using a third-party plugin to use it, to do it? Okay, just one. Yeah, so it's not that complicated to put in your own audit trail, but I did it many, many years ago because we were doing some iPad solutions and we couldn't use a plugin because the plugin doesn't work on an iPad or the iOS and FileMaker Go. There's an exception now to that, is that you can use plugins in the FileMaker SDK that's wrapping FileMaker Go, if you didn't know that. But it works great. In fact, if I'm not even doing a healthcare solution, I'm putting in a freaking audit trail. It is so valuable from a testing perspective, knowing what went wrong, who did what, maybe there's some rogue script running. And so put it in. But also in your audit trails, don't forget to manage your deletes. Okay? That's really, really important. Then we have managing user roles, right? So we don't want to have everyone have the same access level in the system. So FileMaker gives us the ability to use privileges or user roles. So a clinician, let's say a doctor, shouldn't have the same access as a biller. One, a doctor doesn't need to generate a bill, nor does a biller need to put in maybe diagnostic information. So roles are important. Integrity is an important part of Hipaa. So we want to make sure that the data that's in the system has been authorized to be modified. And they talk about making sure that the changes in the database are accurate, that someone hasn't manipulated behind the scenes. And that's kind of where the audit trail comes in as well. So if the DBA, who's ever responsible, it's not us as developers necessarily do it unless we want to take that responsibility on, but it's to do an audit of the audit trail. So if you look at your audit trail and then look back at what the real system is, the data should kind of match at any given point in time, right? If it doesn't, we got some type of integrity issue. Either the audit trail is not getting back, set, or someone manipulated the data in the system, but there's a flaw somewhere along the line. So I just give you a quick example. There's no PHI in this whatsoever. This is not even, but what I'm tracking here under the data ID, well, the account ID is obviously who made the modification. So this is all field level tracking, and it's stored in a separate FileMaker file. And the data ID is the parent key ID of the table. And so the way we work it is every single table on our database uses the same parent key naming convention. It's all sysuid. And what that allows us to do is make our process of storing this information much easier because I can use a get field function. And listen, I could spend like 3 hours just going through audit trail, and I know I don't have that time, and nor do you want me to. But the important thing that I want to point out is the script name. So sometimes scripts modify data. And so now I know what has modified what script did it. So if a user says, no, I didn't modify it, I can see if actually a script under that account name did it, or they personally did it because there's nothing there. Okay? So viewing data. That is also a requirement. How many put in if someone actually views detailed information to their system? I'm assuming you did, yep. Okay, so this is a requirement, and it's really simple to do. It's not that complicated. And I'm going to show you the script. It's about 12 lines of code to do this. And then you can go crazy with it. So it's not enough to know who did what when. We also want to know who viewed what when. They might not have changed any data. So how many of you heard of people getting fired in an institution for looking up a VIP? Yeah, they get reported pretty quickly. So all we need to do is store the layout number, the primary key, and who did what and the time they actually did it and view it. I'm not required to see what, I don't need in this view to put in what they actually saw, okay? Because I can build that back from the audit trail. So I know at any given point, if I take that primary key, I can go back to the audit trail and tell you exactly what it was at that time. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you want to do VIP views, there's a couple ways of doing that as well. You could have a flag at the patient level to say this is a VIP, and potentially you could put only the people that can have access to them. But in a larger organization, that doesn't really make a tremendous amount of sense. If you think about, let's say, a large EMR system, and maybe someone's in for a hip replacement, but now there's a cardiology consult for that patient. We want the cardiologist to be able to view that information, okay? So, but at the very least, if we put a view on there to say, create a log every time someone's viewed this VIP and create a report at the end of the day or immediately, whatever time frame you want, we could actually do that at that point and build that script into it. I'll get through this and then I'll show you the screens on how to build the views. Anyone using field level encryption in the database? Okay, you are? What are you using it for? Passwords too? For another system? Okay. So that you said like like national security numbers, like I guess like our social security numbers, things like that, right? And then passwords. That was really be the only scenario that I could think of too, was more like social security numbers. I mean, we're usually not storing credit cards in here too. And the only thing I think of breach of that potentially is like on an export. So if you didn't have field encryption, but you turned on export, then you might be able to export that data. But if you have field encryption turned on and you don't have access to it, then you can't. Like, you're not going to see anything really, or you see crap. So I haven't come up with too many scenarios to use field level encryption, but I will say with field level encryption, do not store the key inside the database. I've talked to Steve Blackwell out. He made a great suggestion to me a couple of years ago. How about storing in a text field in your documents folder on the server, so that way you can call it when you need the key to open it up. So that way you don't have the keys in the car, okay? Just gonna hit on role-based security. One more thing, because it's about viewing data. And that is that we don't need to have, and this is, because of hide objects, we don't need to have multiple layouts to do things anymore, right? We can hide layouts based on obfuscation a little bit, right? And that can now, from a developer perspective, reduce the amount of work and having to do it in multiple places. So that's been a great feature for me anyway, is to say, okay, this privilege says can't see this information over here, or even hide a whole tab or something like that. Even in the navigation bar too, right? You can even hide a navigation bar. You don't even see it, just spreads out a little bit wider. So, let's see. Whoop, we'll fly that in. My only flying, okay, I'm sorry. How to do something. So when I typically want to find a patient in my system, I show no patients. One, otherwise you're always showing the same 20 patients anyway, right? And it's not the one of the 20 patients you want. So they're all hidden, and then you just type up in the search bar the name. You can put the MRN number, you can put a date of birth in there, it doesn't matter, and then it'll return who you're looking, potentially who matches that criteria. So I hit return, I get some patients in, and then I select a patient. So at this point, I'm not tracking who saw this information, okay? I only track it, the view of this information, when I get to the detail view. It would be basically the next screen. And why? Well, the reason for that is, I always have to verify the patient I'm going on anyway by at least 2 identifiers, right? I need a patient name and a medical record number, a DOB, something to authenticate that this is. Because I bet you anything, there's more than 2 Tim Browns, or 1 Tim Brown anyway, in the world. So when I come in, I set up a script trigger called onRecordLoad. And that script will call my record load. And that will actually post the view over to a log. So this is the script. So actually, I don't even need the second line for the timestamp. But all I need to do is track the layout. I'm getting the table name from the layout. I'm getting the SysU ID. You can see my naming convention. So basically, since I have the table, I know what the SysU ID is. So I'm saying get field. So this is completely extensible to no matter what layout you are, as long as you're using the same naming convention for your SysU ID. And then I create a new window, because I don't want the record load to open up again, right? So I create a new window right to the log, off screen. You can see my -100 over to the right. Anyone do the off-screen stuff? Yeah, it's great, So I'm doing off-screen, I create my new record, I commit it, and I close the window, and then they're on. You don't even know it happened. It's that quick. You could also, well, I guess you can't do something else, but, so then I'm in the screen, and then I'm in my, my detail view screen. So anytime, even if I use the navigation between fields, if FileMaker's navigation, it'll still do that as well, right? Because we're using the on-record load. It's more records, right, in the thing. I mean, in that file that you just saw before, there was over 9 million records in that file. And it's freaking fast. If I want to find out any one of those fields, it finds it like that. So I don't really, it's a little bit of overhead, little extra data. But then I archive them. It's not like they're going away. They just get archived. I take a new clone and I throw it in there. But the key, though, with your logs is to make sure they're separate files, right? For each type of log, too, only because of space. And you also don't want them backed up. So if you're doing backup routines throughout the day, you don't want that being backed up. I mean, I got 9 million records in there for no reason to be backed up. So, well, there's a reason, but I don't want to slow down users too. So I do my one nightly backup of the audit log. Lastly, in my 4-part thing is restoring data. It's really working with IT at this point. There could be a reason for restoring the data. Maybe the file got corrupt and we got to go to IT and get the backup. It could be a snapshot link that they're using because it's VMware, and so they're just going to spin up another slice for you. But the key here is that it has to have data integrity. And so we mentioned before that we're encrypting our backups, right? We use a developer tool to do that. So now we can be rest assured that whatever backup we have has not been modified because of the encryption that's turned on that, okay? The only way that could be breached is the person who actually has the key changes it and then turns it over. But that's, you're going to have that. So what are you trying to do? You trying to get certification or compliance? And I'm sure since so many people have been doing this, there is really no such thing as certification anymore, or was, but it's only for EMR solutions, right? And it's extremely expensive. Because I've had people ask me, is your solution certified? I'm like, no, who's going to certify it? But we're striving for compliance. And the thing about compliance is it's really self-monitored. Think about it. And it's based on the institution's policies. How many of you have received exactly what needs to be in a solution in your institution? Even the inside people. I know I never have, and I had this huge argument with the Hipaa security team at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. She was like, oh, we gave it to you. I was like, what did you give me? It's out there on the internet. I'm like, what did you give me? She was just pointing to the regular regulations, not their interpretation of the regulations. I was blown away. I was doing work for a neurosurgeon. He was on the call too. He had to intervene because I was going to blow a gasket. Okay? At least I was with the right person, I guess. So it's really important that you know it's about compliance and that you really need to get information from the IT security team about what's required to be built into it. I think it's a little bit of semantics. I think today it's many years ago it was about going after the public money for it. And today that money, I think it's dried up, right? That money is done, right? All those rounds. And so an EMR versus a health record versus having some clinical information gets a little bit more blurred, I think. But for practical matters, people want to email. And they want to email PHI, right? Can you do it? Well, yes and no, right? You can email it with inside of your healthcare domain. So if I'm doing work, I'm sorry, I thought I had something else. But if I'm doing work at, and I just finished this at Northwell Health Systems, we can email PHI data within the institution because it's not going outside the domain, right? But as soon as but if a doctor wants to email PHI to a patient, that's a little taboo, right? So we can use an API to send secure emails. So we push the data through an SSL socket to the what I call it. They send the email out for you. The patient gets the email. They then have to click a link, go to the web browser. They log in. They create a password. The whole 9 yards. Not tremendously secure, in my opinion, because who intercepted that email on the way? I don't know. But you can do that, and that's compliant. And the same thing with SMS and MMS messaging, too. You could use something like Twilio that will do secure messaging between phones. One of our solutions that we built in, too, was for the doctors, when the procedure rooms were ready for them to go in, they got a text message if they weren't around, right? But we're not sending any PHI. And so maybe there's some ways you can send and notify people without having to send PHI. So you can be creative in that too. This next one is a great way to be creative. Anyone use a snapshot link? It's a little known secret. I love it. So we have a lab, and I'm going to mention the lab tomorrow, called Androbia Labs. Are in New Jersey. And they do a very specific test, and you'll have to know what it is tomorrow if you go to the, it's the the medical case management solutions that Robert and I are going to be doing. But the snapshot link is great because we set up an email to go to the lab director that's not always at the lab. He is a kind of hired gun. I don't know if you know a lot of these small labs, especially for andrology and embryology, they may serve as a whole bunch of places. So he gets an email saying that the results of a lab test was negative, not in the range that they were expecting. He now needs to go review it and sign off on it. And so all he does, he gets the snapshot link in his email. He has FileMaker Go on his iPhone. He clicks on it. It opens up, goes right to that patient. He can view the report. And he can sign it or not sign or ask them to retake the test. It's a great use of it. So mobile data. Our iPads and iPhones are, more specifically iOS, HIPAA compliant? Well, you have to do your own risk assessment. It all is in the eye of the beholder, in my opinion. I've been in institutions where it's not allowed at all. Okay, you want to bring it out, the doctors want it, and they will not touch it. And then the other place, oh yeah, no problem, we can do it. So it all depends. But I will say that iPads and iPhones, although are more, how can I be diplomatic, are more secure out of the box than a laptop. Nowadays, they build a lot of, especially on PCs, a lot of built-in stuff to make sure that they're more secure, the IT departments. Are Androids compliant? Well, we don't have FileMaker Go, right? So we have to use WebDirect. So that has nothing to do about compliance or not, but I do feel that they're a little less secure. And why do I think that? People like, oh, especially if they're really into Androids, right? I'm an Apple guy, right? And so they like to pick on me. Well, one thing, what is their percentage of people actually upgrading their OS? It's really, really, really poor. And anyone can write for it. So what do we need to do to secure our iPads and iPhones? Well, if it's an institution iPhone or iPad, we certainly want to put a mobile device management service on those. Anyone deploying with iPhones and iPads? Anyone able to do an MDM? Because not everyone can do MDM. You're able to? It's really, if you own them, it's the only way to go, right? It locks them down. It makes the user so that they can't even add other applications. There's a ton of settings that you can do, more than I even know, okay? But it really will secure whatever's on the iPad. You can remote wipe it clean. But even still, regardless of that, we still want to require a 6-digit PIN for logging into the iPad at a minimum. device needs to be encrypted, and the iOS or the device is actually encrypted out of the box. We don't have to do anything there. And auto erase after 10 fail attempts. These are all things, obviously, that are built into the iOS. Few things, though. Make sure you turn notifications off when the screen's locked. Okay? We don't want things popping up that might have PHI data in it. And then disable Siri when it's locked, that you just can't talk to it and actually get information back. That might be not good. And that's a huge, huge faux pas. do not sync to the iCloud if you have PHI on it. I guarantee that you don't have a BAA with Apple. So all the things, if you're bringing your own device to work, then almost all those things are the same except for the fact we can't do MDM. Okay, we're going to do all these things. And the last thing, IT may require you to sign some type of security agreement that you have done all of these things, and that you'll wipe it clean, you'll make it a brick, even though you lost all of your Christmas pictures. So I like to add a little bit more security on these devices too, especially if they're going to be going to a host server, especially if they're going to go to a host server. I like to register all the devices using getting persistent ID. So I have a log, so if when the user logs in, I check the device, make sure that device is registered with my solution. If it's not, then they get kicked out, even if they have a username and password to get in. Because how easy is it to download FileMaker Go? Right? It's free. You can put it on any device. So we want to make sure that the devices are approved to get into the solution. A lot of times, maybe it's me, maybe it's a preference, I don't know. But users on the iPad grudgingly don't want to put a username and password in. They put a PIN in to get into FileMaker. They put a PIN in to get into the device. Now they're going to put a username and password in to get into FileMaker Go. A lot of times we use pins to get in to the solution. Okay? How many people use pins on top of it? Okay. It's a risk assessment here, whether to do it or not do it. I will tell you that it'd be more secure if you put username and password, but this is a balance that we need to make with the users too. When you're outside of the network, especially if it's a device that, well, it doesn't matter if it's a device owned or it's bring your own device to Workday, you probably are going to want to, or they're going to want you to install a VPN, because these large institutions that I've been working for, I'm not going to go ask them to open up port 5003. It's just not going to happen, and it's not even worth my breath, right? But they will set up a VPN for you to get in, and that's great. Now we have another layer of security on top of getting onto the Mac, putting the PIN in. Now we have to do this, and generally when you're going into the VPN too, they're usually giving you some type of two-factor authentication, like an RSA key that you have to use too. I mean, that's the way mine has been working to get into these institutions now. So storing PHI on the device, it's called disconnected data, right? We've taken data off the server and brought it local to the iPad. We do not want the iPad to be compromised in any way at this point. We have a bunch of security. We know it's encrypted. We know it'll become a brick after 10 misattempts. But should we encrypt the local file using the developer tool? Well, I think encryption on top of encryption is maybe overkill. You could, but it adds another huge layer. Now, the user needs to have a key to unencrypt it, and so don't do it. Okay? Someone brought it up. I'm like, that would be crazy. But synchronized dating to the host. We need to get data down to the iPad. I mean, you can use some of the tools that are out there to use it. You can create your own imports to push data back and forth between them. There's a bunch of ways of doing it. But we need to make sure that we have secure connection with the host, obviously, right? And to mitigate our risk too, we only want to sync the data that the user needs. Nothing more, nothing less. Just-in-time data. So if I'm a field nurse and I have 10 visits that I need to see today, I should basically only have 10 visits on my iPad. I don't need to pull down the 30,000 patients that are in the whole database. And that way my exposure is a lot less in case that iPad got compromised in some way. So cloud-based service, I want to touch upon this. I am no expert in this whatsoever because I won't do this. We have cloud services. We use cloud services, but not for PHI. So what this first screen you're looking at is that Amazon will do a PHI compliant database. They will sign a BA agreement with you. You have to be part of the partner network with AWS to do that as well. And I don't know how many of you realize this, but a little over a year ago, it was really, really expensive to do it too. You had to purchase the whole instance of the server because they weren't going to make sure. But as of May 2017, that's no longer the case. So you can actually have a slice now, so that brought down the price of doing this a lot less. But you cannot connect it to a PHI server to a non-PHI server in the Amazon cloud space. That's my understanding. So working with IT security teams, I think there's a lot of good things to know, and at least from my perspective of how I've had to deal with them over the years. So the first thing, and ask for this up front, so if you're building a solution from scratch, these security questionnaires are assuming that it's already a built solution. Okay? How many of you built out these security questionnaires? I'm sure everyone that's been in an institution has, right? Okay, not that many. Actually, I thought it'd be almost everyone. If we have time, I'll show you what one will look like. So the security questionnaire is really, really important to go through at the very beginning. Ask for it from IT. This will help you design your security model of what they're going to require in your solution. And they're not making really requirements. They're asking, does your solution have this? Are you managing the accounts, or are you using Active Directory, or are you, will the database be encrypted? But there's about 150 questions like that. That you built, but it'll give you an idea of what their requirements are, because as I said earlier, they're not giving you the policy. It's very cryptic. So ask for the questionnaire. Know FileMaker's capabilities. How many people have been integrated HL7, some type of HL7 interface? Donna, okay, a few people. It can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. But I would recommend when you're dealing with IT security teams to put that into phase 2. Don't let this slow down everything to go live on a system, okay? It's a manual input potentially, unless it's an absolute requirement. Usually this is a nicety for a department. So generally, when we're talking about EMR integrations, we're usually integrating it with HL7, but it doesn't have to be. Anyone doing any type of integration with Epic or different things? Okay. Are you using HL7, Donna? Okay. Because they opened that up, what, about a year ago? Okay. So it takes time to learn it, but it's a really good thing. It saves users a ton of time and reduces errors in putting patients' names in and all this other stuff. okay? It's a really slow process with IT teams, really slow. How many people have gone through like a project management team with IT security, the help desk, the project manager? My first experience that was at Cornell many years ago, and it was me and 12 of my best friends from Cornell in a room, asking me 20 million questions. Remember, you have two clients here, right? You have two clients. You have the department who you're building a solution for, and you have IT security. You have to be friends with them. You can't be adversarial at all, because they'll even go even more slow, okay? You want them on your side. And they're all good people, they are, but they're in a bureaucracy, to be perfectly honest. It's a real bureaucracy. And why is that? I'll give you my thoughts about that. Cost center versus revenue center. You know what I mean by that? Anyone know what I mean by that? Many years ago, all the IT departments were cost centers. So they're treated more like accounting, right? Every time they send out a bill, they're not charging that department to send out that bill. It's an overhead. So was IT. Not anymore. The vast majority of hospitals are revenue centers. So that's why there's 12 people in the room, because they're charging the department for 12 people's time to do this project. And meanwhile, there's just me in the room with them. The vast majority of projects that I do, the IT costs are 2 to 3 times more than my cost. So just be aware of why that is, okay? And then we briefly talked about cloud or local hosting. If I'm developing a solution for a facility, I want it local. I don't want to deal with the cloud. I don't want to be, if it's their cloud, that's one thing, right? It's their security, but I want it on their servers. Let's be more specific. I don't care where the heck it is, but I don't want to deal with the risk of I have this great solution, I want to sell it to you, and you're going to use my web services for that. It opens up a whole risk assessment. In one of the agreements that I had, if I was hosting it, I needed to do a SOC 2 compliance audit every year. And when I did some research on it, that costs about $20,000 a year at a starting point for doing a SOC 2 compliant audit. So maybe that's nothing if you're charging a lot for the solution, but or you have a lot of them out there. But it's just something to be aware of. My insurance that I carry because of this, I mean, I have obviously professional insurance, I have errors and omission insurance, and I also have cybersecurity insurance. I'm not hosting anything for cyber, but a lot of the institutions require me to have it because they have other people carry it. And so it's not that costly for me because I'm not hosting anything. So just be aware of that. So at this point, please ask away on questions that you might have or what environment you might be in.
That was great, thank you. So 2 questions. Number 1 is how much more secure is a solution where the mobile devices are only logging on to the remotely hosted files and not having a local file with downloaded data?
Did you say if the file is just local on the iPad?
No. Only hosted.
You're just connecting to the server and you don't download any data.
Right.
I think it's very secure. I think it's more secure than obviously the PHI. I'm not sure how much of the caching goes on the iPad, but once again, that's also encrypted. So as long as you're following the other stuff, it's going to be pretty secure. Great.
And the other question is with email. I have a client that went to some email service where they say that it's a secure, they say HIPAA protected email service. So I believe that I don't know if it's through the system, but they're sending, I think, PHI data through this secured email service. Is that HIPAA compliant?
It could be. I mean, there are new things out there with email too to have a certificate in the email, but if it's like straight Outlook to go out, I'm not 100% sure if it is or isn't. I don't know. Robert, do you know?
So any of the encrypted emails that you'll get, because the email is not stored on on the person's domain. It's like a visual image that they're sending you, like you're remote connecting. When you disconnect, you don't have a copy of that email. If you choose to print out a hard copy of that or cut and paste it, then it's like anything else, right? It's beyond technology to be compliant, it's stupidity.
So, does that kind of answer your question? Or is it more about the API that they're using to push?
No, it's just that they went to this email server company and they feel that they are being HIPAA compliant that way.
Yeah, it could be like a browser-based email client that is secure. I mean, those definitely exist. I mean, that's kind of why I think Microsoft 360 is out there now with the web browser where you can do a little bit of that as well, you know?
Thank you.
Can you talk about the standard you may use for what to track? Is it like CFR 21 Part 11? How long do you keep the logs, and exactly what do you track?
Okay.
Thanks.
Great question. Because I think I skipped over some stuff too then. The one thing, and I meant to mention this when we had the slide up about compliance versus certification, and that is why aren't there, you know, why is this compliance thing what it is, and it's kind of fuzzy, right? It doesn't tell you exactly what you should be doing. And it's my interpretation, that's because they want it fuzzy. They want it to change over time, the standards, as new security or new security threats even come through, that the regulations are tight enough that they can say that you breached something, okay? So a solution that's secure today may not be secure tomorrow based on today's standards, you know, in the future. Getting back to CFR 21, when there aren't specific instructions of how to do something, we always look at CFR 21 and say what they should be doing for that. So you can look there. So for instance, electronic signatures. How do you accept electronic signature? You're going to ask that? So CFR 21 Part 11 discusses electronic signatures and what you need. So a lot of times that's re-authentication, right? You want to take, and that's actually very simple to do. We've done that in a few of our systems too. So we have another file that we create that you re-authenticate into that file, and as long as that went through just fine, then we know you were authorized and therefore the electronic signature goes through. So we're not making you log back into the whole system, just this one file that's over here, because if it's not accurate, you're not blown out of the whole system. Or it could be someone else that needs to sign it, like an administrator. So another lab director that comes over to review it, he signs it on someone else's desktop.
Are you encrypting beyond just the normal transmission of the encryption data? In other words, are you encrypting anything on that second file?
Well, the second file would have nothing in it. There's no data at all in it. All that is a file that's standing there maybe with a script in it to do a relogin script. That's all it does, and if it goes through successfully, then I know they're authenticated. I have the account name, and I use that account name to pass back to the electronic signature.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
I wonder if you could talk about how the duration for how long you save the logs.
Oh yeah. I never get rid of them. I mean, I honestly don't. They're backed up somewhere every single time. I mean, it's just, there's for my purpose, there's no reason to get rid of it, you know?
Do you think they stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the standard probably, I look at the tax side of things like 7 years potentially. I don't know if there's a specific regulation that says how long you should keep them. There probably is.
25 years from the date of, I mean, it makes it impossible because it's growing every
Yeah,
day.
you're right.
You got one log and it was from January 1st, 2000. You got to keep it till January 1st, 2025.
So I think and it can be even more than that. It's based on the patient. You need to keep those records for 25 years once they become age of majority, right? So once they're 18. So it could even be longer than that. So I'm not sure if the audit logs need to, but the data does. So Yes, I'm definitely updating the slides. I'll do that in a little while, actually. You know, as the day was going on, I was updating them as I was practicing, and as you would expect. Yeah. You're allowed to view, you typically, even in most EMRs, most people have access to all the patients in the EMR system. They're not supposed to per se. You know, the regulations are you should only have access to patients that you should have access to. You need to have access to. But no one knows what they need to have access to, so you give access to everything. And since you need to, since this is, those three elements on that page were all PHI data points, right? Or at least PII anyway. I need to see that information to make a determination of who I want to look at, and that's why. So until I start getting into the medical side of it, I don't log it. Because the log would get tremendously big for something they never even looked at. So once again, getting into that VIP patient back, if I logged it and it was Tim Brown, the football player, then maybe then we just put an alert on you that wasn't necessary, right? I don't know if there's any, I don't think there's anything specific about that to be perfectly. Yeah, so I'm sorry, the question was if there was a bunch of data points, PHI data points, maybe there's 4 of them, would it be necessary then to log that? And I don't think there's any specific regulation for that. Yeah, Watercall talked about it 2 sessions ago in the room here, and it was actually very good. It was all very similar to all the Hipaa stuff, to be perfectly honest, you know, except the reporting time frame, I think, was 24 hours or 72 hours, something like that. What is it for Hipaa? Anyone know? As soon as you can, but no more than 60 days. So a lot different there. A lot different. Because once he said it, I go, I better look that up. Someone's going to ask that question. You know, I didn't know what it was. And just so you know, it's reportable to the Secretary of Health and Human Services when there is. But it's only for breaches that are not secure. So if you lose an iPad that's encrypted, it doesn't need to be reported. So viruses based on the iPad connecting to the server? I don't have an answer. I don't know. I don't know if FileMaker is doing something on the back end to prevent something like from happening. I know I had to sign my life away that I wasn't going to put viruses on the server when I connect to them. Otherwise, they'll come after me. So I hope not. You're reminding me of one other thing, though, about that, too, though. It'll probably hit me in a minute. There's so many things like to discuss in this. I mean, I hope I hit what you were expecting out of this. If you have questions, certainly, you know, contact me. If you need help with anything, you know, just send me an email, give me a call. Whatever you know, I'm here to really help navigate some of the processes that you might have to go through. Anyone else have any other additional questions? Yeah. So there's a server-side plugin that you can do. I know we had one. We did do one many years ago. What was the name of the company? Lionel Blue? Yeah. Were there someone else before that? Yeah, because we used it, the problem was it was so freaking slow. Yeah, it was really slow for us when we originally did it. It could be much faster now. That's why I came out and did my own thing, because it's blazing fast and we don't have to worry about anything. And then if it was causing problems, yeah. That's what I've been noticing at a few hospital clients now. All of a sudden I'll get a secure email. And sometimes they're even reading and looking for some PHI data in it, and they'll automatically seem like they're switching it too. Because randomly I'll get a secure email and there's nothing in there that really needs to be secured. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, especially with the iPads. Well, thanks so much. Reach out to me.